Hi guys, my name is Roen and I'll be teaching the SAT practice tests, the digital SAT practice tests that are online. Together we'll go through all the questions. So very important, go take the practice test if you haven't already. It will be much more effective if you know what's happening and have had some experience taking the test before going through and kind of watching the lectures. So second thing we're going to talk about today is kind of the important need to know aspects of the SAT I've gathered to show you guys. It is quite a bit, but it'll show you that if you're thinking about the test the right way, the test becomes a lot more manageable, I would say. So let's take a look. For the vocab questions, you guys have to look for the hints. Anytime that a hint is offered, obviously it should not be ignored. Focus less on the rest. So once you find the hint, the rest of the passage becomes irrelevant or less important, depending on the situation. This and colons, anytime that you see these two, they're very, very helpful. We'll take a look at examples in a little bit. Map the relationship between the ideas as you read. You should never just be reading on autopilot. You always want to figure out, is this something I should actually remember? Is this something that I can ignore? Anytime you see a cause and effect, contrast, similarity, statement and examples, any of these situations, you have to keep it in mind. In the beginning, it's going to feel like a lot to kind of remember all at the same time. But with practice, it's going to become automatic and the test will feel a lot more easy than if you were to do this alone without much help. Okay, so this. The word this is so important. Former astronaut Ellen says that although she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen, she blinked that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth. This conjecture. So here's our this. She doesn't have an idea of when it will happen, but she does have a conjecture. The closest word to that, those hints, we don't need to understand the rest of the passage, it's speculates. This conjecture, she speculates, like that. You're able to draw a direct connection to something in the passage, then it's got to be the answer. So if a hint is offered, take advantage, because sometimes hints are not as obvious. Colon is another very helpful kind of hint for us, right? Seminal Sterling Harjo blank television's tendency to situate native characters in the distant past. This rejection is evident in his series Reservation Dogs. This rejection. So that means that whatever was previously stated is going to be a rejection because this colon implies everything after is going to be an example. Rejection is an example of this, meaning this also has to be rejection. So the answer is repudiates. He refuses to accept. Sterling Harjo refuses to accept. He repudiates the television's tendency, blah, blah, blah. This rejection is evident, etc., etc. Like that. So looking for the hints as you read will reveal the answer without you having to give it much thought, which is excellent, right? Connecting ideas. So The Mulebone, a 1930 play written by Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, is perhaps the best known of the few examples of blank in literature. Most writers prefer working alone, and given that working together cost Hurston and Hughes their friendship, it is not hard to see why. So if most writers prefer working alone, that means we should have a lot of examples of them working alone. That tells us that if it's the few examples, it's got to be the opposite. So what's the opposite of prefer working alone? It's collaboration. Few examples of collaboration in literature, most writers prefer working alone. So as you read, you should be connecting the ideas. This idea that if it's a few example, it has to be the opposite of most writers prefer working alone. If you can keep this in mind as you're reading, the answer will be a lot more obvious. Another thing you guys can do is elimination. I do this constantly for critical reading. I'm going to eliminate the other ones because that's one way to confirm one more time that my answer is correct because we're human, we'll make mistakes. If you can eliminate the other three, that means your answer must be correct, right? Relationship. Another important thing you must do while taking the vocab test or the vocab section of the test is to consider the relationship between the words. As you read, in nature poem, Poet Tommy Pico portrays his blank, the natural world, by honoring the centrality of nature within his tribe's traditional beliefs while simultaneously expressing his distaste. So how can you simultaneously honor something and show a distaste for it? That means the answer is ambivalence. Relationship between the words. They're opposite, but they're happening at the same time, like that. Like I said, if the hint is not directly given to you, if it is not a synonym or a direct definition of the answer, you're going to have to better understand the passage, maybe read it again. The fossils are so well preserved that the team has been able to occupy, hoard, reserve, or obtain. The answer is obtain. Because it is well preserved, you're able to get detailed information about the life forms that left them behind, like that. So this being well preserved could not be related to occupying, hoarding, or reserving. It's showing us detailed information. In that manner, if you guys can think of a word that should go in the passage without making any assumptions, often you might actually guess the answer or a synonym of it, like that. So if the answer is less obvious, read carefully and actually understand the passage. This is less necessary if the hint is kind of given to you on a plate. And don't worry, most of the vocab questions that I've seen, especially for the first 6 practice tests, do give you an obvious hint. Another thing that you guys can do when the answer is less obvious is to consider opposites. If we are given words like but, however, whereas, while, anything like that, it's important that you guys think about it. Skeptical colleagues had initially suggested to Bastos that the key's interactions with the stones might simply be blank, but Bastos and her team showed that the key was using the stones deliberately. So if it's a contrast, what's the opposite of deliberate? That's what you should ask yourself. Question mark, like that. So accidental is our answer. Right? If it's the opposite of deliberate, it has to be accidental. Okay. Moving on, we're going to now talk about some important things to keep in mind while you're taking the critical reading portion of the test. As you read, you must consider the importance of the ideas. As you read, know what you can ignore and what you have to remember. That's extremely important. Because it's a timed test, we don't want to be constantly rereading the passage. Write a summary if you have the time. This is crucial for when you're practicing, but I don't think you guys will have that much time to be able to do a very detailed summary when you're taking the actual test. But make sure you guys do it during practice because it's going to help your brain start doing it on its own without having to write anything down. Knowing what to look for, essentially. Know what to look for. This helps you find what to look for, writing a summary. Map the relationship between the ideas as you read. So anytime that you see a cause and effect, a contrast, again, like we talked about in the vocab questions, similarities, differences, statement and examples, lists, repetition, these things you must write down and you must be able to recognize it as you're reading. More kind of helpful hints. Find the keywords in the answer choices. This is a necessity. You have to do it. It's a requirement. Words that show how the answer choice is different from the others most clearly. Unfortunately, this is not that intuitive. A lot of my students struggle with this one, knowing which words in the answer choices make it different from the others. You guys will see me talk about this during every question as we go through the lectures, but you should also be able to do this on your own. It is subjective. People will choose different things, but over time there is going to be a better word to focus on. These are the key words that you need to highlight, underline, write down, anything that you need to better understand the passage. This here is almost like insurance. If one word is wrong, the entire answer choice is wrong. So this is going to be hand in hand with elimination. I never consider the correct answer to be the correct answer unless I can eliminate all the others. So A, B, C, and D, let's say A was the answer. I would call this a maybe until I can prove that B, C, and D are all incorrect. If there is even one word wrong in B, C, and D, that means those answer choices are incorrect, and that now turns my maybe into a yes. Okay? Because, again, we will make mistakes taking the test. You guys need to somehow figure out a way to catch yourselves if you do so. This is going to help. Common helpful keywords that you need to know for critical reading. How, why, those ones are really important. Most, best, worst, greatest, all the superlatives, words that are making assumptions that are not backed up by evidence, anything like that is going to be a common helpful keyword. We're going to delete the obviously wrong answer choice first. So if you are able to determine the words that show which answer choice or like what is different about each answer choice, then you can delete the ones that are obviously wrong. Okay, then your chances of getting the question right will jump from like, let's say if we can eliminate C and D because they're just ridiculous, then now you have a 50% chance of getting the question right. It's just a probability game. Okay. We talked about this already. If you're going to consider, you read an answer choice that's very, very good, doesn't make any assumptions, then you mark it as a maybe. Do not consider it correct unless you're able to eliminate the other ones first. Okay. Almost always that answer choice, one of those answer choices that are maybes will be the answer if you're doing it right. Okay, no assumptions. Another very, very important note. I'm going to draw 2 exclamation points there because that's so important. If it doesn't say it or inarguably imply it, you cannot assume it. We'll take a look at all of these in the next few slides. Okay. Reading efficiently. So take a second. I'm not going to read this out loud, but it can seem overwhelming when you have so little time to solve each question. Take a second, pause. Okay. Now, as you guys get better at reading carefully, determining what we can ignore and what you have to remember, the passages are going to feel a lot easier. So I've highlighted them in yellow for you. It should be, they shouldn't be classified as literature. So text 1, not literature. Or like making them more similar to film, more like film. Your summaries do not need to be, too coherent as long as you can understand them. Text 2 says, graphic novels are, yes, lit, like that. Based on the text, how would the author of text 2, we're looking for how text 2 would respond to text 1. Again, answer choices look really crazy at first, but if you're able to determine what makes each answer choice different from the other ones, it's going to be a lot easier. So when I say this, my students will start here, trying to determine the difference between these words. Agreeing, suggesting, acknowledging, asserting. Yes, they're all different, but it's a lot easier to look at these instead, right? Why focus on the difference between asserting and acknowledging when you can look somewhere else? So this is what I mean by those words that are very clearly different or make an answer choice clearly different from the other ones. By asserting that language plays a more important role in graphic novels, did text 2 say that? Identify a flaw that is common to all. Remember, I told you those common helpful words that you need to focus on. The passage never said that it's going to be all, so B is incorrect. C, more difficult to understand. Another thing that they did not say. We can delete C. And D, most. Another one of those helpful words, right? Because text 2 literally just said, yes, graphic novels are considered literature, like that kind of thing. Anything that is making an assumption or mentioning something that was not mentioned in the passage, you can delete it. Okay, the answer was, language plays a more important role in graphic novels. Okay. As you read, consider importance of the ideas. Ignore what you can and remember what you have to remember. That's going to help you answer the question. So take a second, read this. This should be solved in like 30 seconds if you're doing well. Okay? And now ask yourself, which of these words stands out? There is one that stands out more than the others. I'll show you in a second. Pause if you need to. Okay, so spiritual is the one that stands out the most to me, as well as well-being depends on the character of its literary culture. So let's take a second to write that down. Spiritual, well-being, and then I'm just going to write like depends on literary culture, lit culture. Okay? So as we're reading the answer choices, you guys have to remember to look for anything closely related to spiritual. It can be soul, it can be spirit, it can be gods, it can be religion, anything of that kind. Literary culture, whether it be books, poems, that kind of thing. And well-being, health, happiness, anything related to these words you should be looking out for. Because we haven't looked at the quotes yet, we're not sure what's going to come up. Okay, overwhelming when you look at it first. But if you remember that we're looking for these words, it's going to become a lot easier. So take a second, try to find these words, pause if you need to. Okay, there. In yellow, you're going to see this part, well-being, lit, culture, whatever. And there's only one answer choice that mentions something close to spiritual. Shores up or demolishes souls. Okay, like that. So that is the fastest way to kind of explain why A was the answer. There's a lot more. I'll talk about that in the actual lectures. Okay, knowing what to look for helps you be able to very quickly and accurately solve the questions. Another thing that we need to talk about is making no assumptions. The following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel, Sense and Sensibility. Take a second, read it if you need to. What we're going to write down is that Eleanor is only 18. Her advice is effectual. She possesses strength of understanding and coolness of, oh, she's 19. Though only 19, so let's say mature. Right? Strength of understanding, to be the counselor of her mother, so mature. Right? All eagerness, blah, 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 blah. Then it says, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn. So I already know the answer to the question, which is why I'm writing this down. But just remember that you cannot make any assumptions about Eleanor. You can only take what the passage says. So keep these things in mind. Let's go take a look at the question. The question is, what is true about Eleanor? Does she argue with her mother? Is she sensitive? Does she think her mother is a bad role model? A lot of these things, if you guys can, like convince yourself in some way, they can work with the passage. Maybe even Eleanor is more mature than her own mom, so they might fight a lot. Maybe these qualities make her sensitive. Maybe she thinks her mother is a bad role model because she cannot govern her own feelings. Like that. We can make it work. But the passage did not say it, so the only thing that we can take is that she is remarkably mature for her age. It mentions that she's 19. It says she has a coolness of judgment and all of these, she's able to govern her feelings, things that her own mother cannot do. She's the counselor of a mom. This is very strongly implied. The other ones are assumptions. Anytime that you see an assumption, you can very safely consider it as being deleted, like just not the answer. Okay? Next one. Critical reading. Another thing that we can do, a hint for you guys, is when you're looking at the graphs, the infographic questions, I always read the passage and eliminate irrelevant answer choices first. Only if I really, really need to, will I go look at the graph. So generally, most of the questions on the digital SAT are going to allow you to answer the question without totally understanding the graph. So it's not going to be checking the graph every single time to get the answer. There are questions like that sometimes, but oftentimes you won't even need to look at the graph to find the answer. Like this one. There's a graph. You waste time trying to understand all of this, the relationship between 20%, 90%, 98, iron, potassium, sodium, waste of time. Instead, you should be reading this and this, okay? It says we're going to use data from the table to complete the example. The example says, whereas the average ablation rate for iron from AST dust is 28%. If you learn how to read it the right way, we're looking for material in slower moving SPC or AST dust that has a lower rate than the same material in faster moving HTC or OCC. So that means that we can delete A and D because it's this part here. What we need is to talk about HTC or OCC. The other ones can be deleted. We did not even look at the graph yet. Now, choosing between these two, it's as simple as noticing that it said same material. If you can read carefully, you'll recognize that sodium and iron, there's only one correct answer, although they do meet this requirement. Only one of them is going to talk about the same material. So C is our answer here. Okay. Grammar. If you are unfamiliar with the grammar rules that are necessary for the SAT, you guys should go look at all of them first, maybe take a class, maybe get a textbook, anything like that. You should know and be able to recognize all of these, and there's at least like 15 more that you need to know. These ones are the very common ones that I've noticed show up on the digital SAT. You guys definitely need to be able to determine the subject, the verb, the antecedents, the participial phrases, the prepositional phrases, all of these words. If those sound unfamiliar, go study all the rules first. Okay, so for the grammar questions, again, knowing what to look for is going to make the SAT feel so much easier. If you guys read properly, if you know exactly what is happening as you're solving the question, all of the sections actually will feel a lot easier, whether it be vocab, critical reading, or grammar, anything like that. Read this sentence, landing on one of the good spaces. The first thing you should recognize is that this here can be deleted because it's a prepositional phrase. Landing is my subject. Allows is singular. Are allowing, have allowed, and allow are all plural. When I see these answer choices, I know that this is following a 3-to-1 ratio. Plural, 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 and singular. This is a very common type of like answer choice like layout that you'll see. You can delete the other three simply because they're not following the singularness of landing. The answer is A. This question, if you know what to look for, should take like 15-20 seconds. Another one, like this. Despite being cheap, versatile, and easy to produce, comma, and then a blank. This tells me that this is going to be a subject modifier agreement question. We're going to look for the subject that's going to be able to be something that is cheap, versatile, and easy to produce. A, B, C, and D, you'll notice that 3 of these answer choices have the wrong subject. Problems cannot be cheap and easy to produce. So our answer is D, commercial plastics. Okay, so I teach my students to take the SAT the easy way. There is a way to look for the right things so that you can ignore the others. There's a way to be able to determine what is important to remember versus things that you can ignore. There's a way to be able to almost predict what question is being asked as you read it through experience and stuff like that. So make sure you guys study a lot of vocab, learn all the grammar rules, take a look at those notes that I've given you earlier, and we can start going through all the questions together. And every question will be done the easy way so that you can save a lot of time and stress. Okay? Hope to see you there. Hi. Okay, today we're going to be going over test number 1 from the official College Board practice test that they've released online for everybody. Personally, I like to teach the SAT the easiest way possible. Essentially, I've been teaching since I took the SATs myself. So I have a little bit of like the know-hows on how to solve these tests. So as we go along through each problem together, I'll teach you little tips and tricks that'll make the test feel a little bit easier. Okay. Module number 1, 33 questions. Let's go. beginning with vocab, we need to focus less on the details. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but as we're reading, we're going to be mapping the relationship between the ideas, understanding words like however or this. This is a very, very important word. You'll notice that I wrote it down here. We have to also find the hints. What's great about the SAT vocab is that there's going to be almost a direct synonym or a definition within the passage that's almost a direct hint for the answer. This happens most of the times. There are a couple of questions that don't do that, but that means that there's got to be some other hint, some other evidence that tells you that that's the answer. Colons are another really important detail that we need to focus on, and we'll kind of look at this as we go along. So again, focus less on the details, map the relationship between the ideas, so we're kind of marking a hierarchy for the importance of each of the phrases and words within the passage. We're going to look for the hints. Anytime that I see the word this, that's going to be very important for us, and colons. Number 1. Former astronaut Ellen Ochoa says that although she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen, she blank that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth. This conjecture, okay, there we go. We see the word this. In combination with the first hint, she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen. This conjecture tells me that the answer has to be one of these, obviously. Demands means insists, speculates is hypothesizes, doubts, questions, establishes, proves. So because this conjecture, she does not have a definite idea, our answer is speculates. Again, there is always going to be a hint in the passage. Number 2, beginning in the 1950s, Navajo Nation legislator Annie Dodge Winnetka continuously worked to promote public health. This blank effort, again, this effort involved traveling throughout the vast Navajo homeland and writing a medical dictionary for speakers of blah, 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 the Navajo language. So again, continuously worked was a really important hint that tells me what answer, what word needs to go into this blank space here. So, impartial, unbiased. Offhand, offensively nonchalant, indifferent, casual. Persistent is existing continuously. There we go. That's extremely close to continuously worked. That's my answer. Mandatory, required by law or rule. So, if we keep in mind the hint within the passage, it tells me the answer. The other words, if we ignore the hints given to us, a lot of the times the words can make sense if you think about it a lot, if you confuse yourself, convince yourself it works. However, if we always keep these hints in mind, there has to be only one correct answer. So, persistent. Okay, number 3. Following the principles of community-based participatory research, tribal nations and research institutions are equal partners in health studies conducted on reservations. There wasn't much there. I'm going to keep reading. A collaboration between the Crow tribe and Montana State University blank this model. There we go. So as I'm able to determine whether it's something that's worth remembering. So the first sentence was just a detail to me. They are equal partners, and in health studies conducted on reservations, it's kind of introducing what happened. So I don't really have an idea of which of these answer choices will be the answer until I get to the sentence in question. A collaboration between the Crow tribe and Montana State University, this model. Now, I remember the first slide, I told you that colons are also very important. So, anytime that we see a colon, the little DC, IC, which means dependent clause or independent clause, following that colon is going to be an example or a really close statement related to whatever came before the colon. So here, this model, tribal citizens worked alongside scientists, is an example for that model, which means my answer is going to be exemplifies. So here are the definitions for each of the words. Circumvents is avoids, eclipses is overshadows, fabricates, creates. All of these words can technically work if you only look here. So A collaboration between the Crow tribe and Montana State University circumvents this model, eclipses this model, fabricates this model. All of that work if you ignore the hint. So that's what I mean by you have to always consider the hint within the passage. Like that. So our answer exemplifies. Okay, number 4. The parasitic daughter plant increases its reproductive success by flowering at the same time as the host plant it has latched onto. So this is also an introductory sentence. However, it says a detail that I start to question, like, what's the point of telling me that it's flowering at the same time? Anytime that you ask yourself, like, what is the author's motive? What is the writer's motive for telling me this detail? And it seems to be important or kind of unique, repetitive, interesting. Any of those types of situations are generally going to be the hint for the passage. So, at the same time as the host plant it has latched onto. Continuing, in 2020, Jian Chang-woo and his colleagues determined that the tiny daughter achieves this, again, it's like, what, like the 4th time we've seen the word this, blank with its host by absorbing and utilizing a protein the host produces when it is about to flower. So as I'm reading, I don't really spend the time to make sure that I completely understand what's happening. More, I'm just considering those important words at the same time. Synchronization, hibernation, prediction, moderation. I'm going to be choosing which of these words has the closest definition to at the same time. Otherwise, we'll be ignoring the hint that was provided to us. So, synchronization happening at the same time. There's our answer. Hibernation, prediction, and moderation are all irrelevant to the question when you consider the main idea, the main hint, at the same time. It's pretty repetitive. Once you start learning how to read the passages for vocab, reading, writing, grammar, any of those, the question starts to feel easier. So that's why I say, like, I try to make the test a little bit easier for you guys. Okay. Next one, answer synchronization. Number 5. Given that the conditions in binary star systems should make planetary formation nearly impossible, okay, so the first thing I'm thinking is, it's making it nearly impossible? I have to focus on this. It's not surprising, so really confusing wording. It's making planetary formation nearly impossible, so it's not surprising that blank has lacked some kind of explanation. So one thing that can be helpful is you can try thinking of a word that could potentially go into the blank. So if it is impossible, I imagine that they're not going to have a very good explanation for it. So I'm going to now look at the definitions for each of the words. It's not surprising, has lacked, discernible, able to be understood, straightforward, uncomplicated, inconclusive, and unprejudiced. So based off of these, I already feel that C and D are not going to be the answer because it's not really answering should make planetary formation nearly impossible. So let's keep that in mind. Able to be understood and uncomplicated, so it's got to be one of these. Should make planetary formation nearly impossible. It's not surprising that it has lacked a good explanation is what we're looking for. So straightforward is my answer. Number 6, seminal Muskogee director Sterling Harjo, blank, television's tendency to situate native characters in the distant past. That didn't tell me much. I need to read more. This rejection, there we go. Another colon. Okay, SAT practice test number 2. We're on the second video for module 2. Let's get started. Number 10. Voters' political orientation, blah, blah, blah. Just looking at it, it's a lot. So we're going to come back to that later if need be. Let's read the passage first. Economists Kerwin Kofi Charles and Melvin Stevens Jr. investigated a variety of factors that influence voter turnout in the United States. using survey data that revealed whether respondents voted in national elections and how knowledgeable respondents are about politics, Charles and Stevens claim that the likelihood of voting is driven in part by potential voters' confidence in their assessment of candidates. Okay, so that was the claim. However, I highlighted the next part because, essentially it's going to be a description of that in kind of easier terms, hopefully. The more informed voters are about politics, the more confident they are at evaluating whether candidates share their views, and thus the more likely they are to vote. Okay, so let's write that down. That's a mouthful. More informed equals more confident, thus more likely to vote. That word is more. Okay, now taking a look here, let's see if we missed anything. Okay, looks good. Okay. Okay. Highlighting in the graph which one is best supporting the claim. Okay. A. At each point on the political orientation scale, high information voters were more likely than low information voters to vote. We're going to consider that. For B, had a voting probability below 50%. C, the closer the low information voters are to the ends of the political orientation scale. D, high information voters are more likely to identify as strong Democrats. Okay, so based off the fact that we're trying to support this claim, the more informed you are equals the more confident, more likely to vote. Definitely not voting probability below 50%. That's not going to really help us. It's also not going to help us to understand that it was at the ends of the political orientation scale. What I care about is the more informed you are, the more confident you are, and thus the more you'd vote. This one, also identifying as a Democrat or a Republican is unnecessary. It's irrelevant to our passage. So, high information voters were more likely than low information voters to vote is directly stating this note that we wrote down here, right? So even without looking at the graph, we can know that each of these answer choices are going to be incorrect by something in here, and the fact that it does not directly support the claim, because we know that what we wanted was the one that was going to directly support this. So it becomes irrelevant to check the graph, but you can if you wanted. Okay, moving forward on to the next question. By the way, A is the answer. Number 11. Spider population count. To investigate the effect of lizard predation on spider populations, a student in a biology class placed spiders in 2 enclosures, one with lizards and one without, and tracked the number of spiders in the enclosures for 30 days. The student concluded that the reduction in the spider population count in the enclosure with lizards by day 30 was entirely attributable to the presence of the lizards. Okay, so the conclusion is the reduction in the spider population with lizards by day 30 was entirely attributable to the presence. So equals because lizards. Okay, so let's take a look at the question. Which choice best describes data from the graph that weaken? Okay, so in this one we are weakening the student's conclusion. Always check, remember, directly support or weaken or undermine. A, it was the same in both enclosures on day 1. B, the spider population count was substantially declined by day 30 in the enclosure without lizards. C, the largest decline in spider population count in the enclosure with lizards occurred from day 1 to day 10. And D, the spider population count on day 30 was lower in the enclosure with lizards than in the enclosure without lizards. So if we're trying to undermine, if we're trying to weaken this conclusion, then we'd imagine that if it says it was the decrease in the spider population with the lizards was because of the lizards. We're going to try to find the opposite of that. So, do I care about the spider population count being the same in both enclosures on day 1? No. That is just like a piece of information for the experiment itself. For B, the spider population count also substantially declined by day 30 in the enclosure without lizards. Okay, so that means that there might be something else involved, so definitely a maybe. C, the largest decline. No, I don't care about something being a largest decline. What I care about is undermining this conclusion. D, the spider population count on day 30 was lower in the enclosure with lizards than in the enclosure without lizards. So that would actually be supporting it, right? We want to see that it was lizards, and that's why it was, or rather, we want to show that it was because of the lizards that it was the lowest. So in order to weaken that, it should say the opposite. So our maybe is no longer a maybe and is confirmed through elimination of A, C, and D. Okay, the next one is number 12. Let's take a look at the passage together. Archaeologist Petra, anthropologists, and their colleagues investigated the domestication of farm animals in China during the Bronze Age, approximately 2000 to 1000 BCE. By analyzing the chemical composition of the bones of sheep, goats, and cattle from this era, the team determined that wild plants made up the bulk of sheep's and goats' diets, while the cattle's diet consisted largely of millet. Okay, so wild plants for sheep's and goats, and millet for cattle, a crop cultivated by humans. The team concluded that cattle were likely raised closer to human settlements, whereas sheep and goats were allowed to roam farther away. So, cattle close to humans, sheep and goats roam farther. Okay. So cattle equals closer to humans, sheep and goats equals roams farther. Just keep that in mind. Which finding, if true, would most strongly support the team's conclusion? Okay, so let's take a look at our key words. A, analysis of the animal bones showed that the cattle's diet also consisted of wheat, which humans widely cultivated. Okay, so it says humans are cultivating. The animal bones for the cattle were also consisting of wheat, which humans widely cultivated, so definitely a maybe. There's nothing to suggest that it is incorrect. B, further investigation of sheep and goat bones revealed that their diets consist of small portions of millet as well. So this one is the opposite, right? They're supposed to roam farther, but we found millet in their diets as well. So this one, not quite. C, generally require larger amounts. We do not care about amounts of food or a variety of nutrients, definitely not C. And D, the diets of sheep, goats, and cattle were found to vary. Okay, no. In order to best support the conclusion, we need to choose the answer choice that is going to talk about this here. Cattle equals closer to humans, so diet also consisted of wheat, which is another crop that was widely cultivated by humans in China. So definitely A is going to be our answer. So I'll erase the maybe box. It's been confirmed through elimination of the other answer choices that A is the answer. Okay. Next question, number 13. Mosasaurs were large marine reptiles that lived in the late Cretaceous period, approximately 100 million to 60. Okay, hello. We are now on Module 1, video number 2 for SAT practice test number 3. Number 11. The following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor lives with her younger sisters and her mother, Mrs. Dashwood. So let's read the passage. Eleanor, this eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother. Again, always ask yourself, what's the point of telling me that she's only 19? It would have been okay to simply mention that she was, possessed a strength of understanding, a coolness of judgment, but why mention that she's only 19? Facts like that are generally going to be very important in the passages that you read. So it qualified her to be the counselor of her mother and enabled her frequently to counteract to the advantage of them all that eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart, her disposition was affectionate and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn. Okay, so she is the counselor of her mother, though she's only 19. She possesses a strength of understanding, a coolness of judgment, but her mother apparently doesn't, right? It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn. Okay? So I'm going to write down maybe a quick summary, something along the lines of Eleanor is 19, only 19, but knows how to govern herself. And maybe coolness of judgment, so understanding. Okay, and the mother is a no. Not. Okay, let me erase this and we'll take a look at the answer choices. According to the text, what is true about Eleanor or Eleanor? A. Eleanor often argues with her mother. Did the passage mention that? B. Eleanor can be overly sensitive with regard to family matters. C. Eleanor thinks her mother is a bad role model. And D. She is remarkably mature. So going through each of these answer choices, you guys can flip back and forth between the passage. I'm not going to. But Eleanor often argues with her mother. There was no mention of an argument. It's true that they may not get along, but the passage did not explicitly say it, so we can't assume it. Overly sensitive with regard to family matters, no, it did not mention that she was sensitive. And Eleanor thinks her mother is a bad role model might be true based off of what we know, but if the passage did not say it, we cannot assume it. So our answer is D. And notice how very generic this statement is, remarkably mature. And it also mentions that age, that though only 19. Oftentimes the most generic answer choices cannot be deleted because there's just nothing very wrong, obviously wrong about them. And I'd say a majority of the time those are going to be the answers. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Number 12. Believing that living in an impractical space can heighten awareness and even improve health, conceptual artists Madeline and Shusaku designed an apartment building in Japan to be more fanciful than functional. A kitchen counter is chest high on one side and knee high on the other. A ceiling has a door to nowhere. This effect is disorienting but invigorating. After 4 years there, filmmaker Nobu reported significant health benefits. Okay, so you can heighten awareness and even improve health if you're living in an impractical space. They cared more about what it looked like than its functionality. And it's disorienting but invigorating. So why don't we write impractical but invigorating. And there were filmmaker, he reported significant health benefits. Healthy. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the answer choices. Okay. Which choice best states the main idea? For A, I'm going to check, did they mention unsustainable? So the rest of the passage or the answer choice is like hard to determine because they're using words that were mentioned in the passage. So home, fanciful, designed, rejuvenating, right? Like that's really close to invigorating. However, did it mention it is unsustainable? No, right? It did not mention unsustainable. B, designing disorienting spaces like those in gyms and Arakawa building is the most effective way, superlative. Is it the most effective way to create a physically stimulating environment? Did it mention that? The answer is no. They did not say that, then we cannot assume it. Even if it is a good way to create it, we can't assume that it is the best way. As a filmmaker, Yamaoka has long supported the designs. Did they mention his support? The answer is no for that one as well. And D, although impractical, the design of the apartment building may improve the well-being. Okay, so healthy, invigorating are both things that could help with your well-being. And that's why D is okay. There's nothing wrong about D as an answer choice. And it is very, very close to the idea that we wrote down here, the summary. Okay, and I will erase this and we'll go on to the next question. Okay, number 13. In a research paper, a student criticizes some historians of modern African politics, claiming that they have evaluated Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, primarily as a symbol rather than in terms of his actions. Okay, so not his actions, but he is a symbol. Which quotation from a work by a historian would best illustrate the student's claim? Okay, let's look at this. A, Lumumba is a difficult figure to evaluate due to the starkly conflicting opinions. We're trying to show that he is a symbol rather than, in terms of his actions. So, difficult figure to evaluate. Check that. B, they were largely consistent. The available information makes it clear that Lumumba's political beliefs and values were largely consistent. Do I care? C, practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It is mainly as a personification. Okay, there we go. That's the first time I'm seeing any word that is close to the word symbol. Right? Personification. So that's likely going to be our answer. D, questions are likely to remain unanswered. Okay, so now let's quickly go through all of these words. This one, difficult figure to evaluate due to the starkly conflicting opinions. So one thing that I like to do is can't know, don't care, like that. So I ask myself, can I know some information within an answer choice? Or do I care about that information? If the answer is no, then we can delete the answer choice. Right? So he is a difficult figure to evaluate due to the starkly conflicting opinions. If we're trying to show that he's seen as a symbol as opposed to recognized for his actions, then I don't care whether he has conflicting opinions or not. Same thing here, I don't care that his beliefs and values are largely consistent. This was our maybe, especially because of the word personification. Practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It is mainly the personification of the independence that blah, 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 blah. And D, do I care that the questions are likely to remain unanswered? No. So our maybe now becomes a yes, and the answer is C. Like that. Moving on to the next question. Number 14. Percentage of Ondo State, blah, 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 farmers who are female by main crop grown. Okay. North Ondo, Central Ondo, South Ondo. So just like a really quick glimpse of the graph, and then we can just go ahead and read the passage. Geographer AOE and his colleagues surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Ondo State. Nigeria, which has mountainous terrain in the north, an urbanized center, and coastal. Okay, guys, welcome. We're doing video 3 for Module 2, practice test number 4. Number 17. Ancestral Puebloans, the civilization from which present-day Pueblo tribes descended, emerged as early as 1500 BCE in an area of what is now the southwestern United States and dispersed suddenly in the late 1200s CE, abandoning established villages with systems for farming crops and turkeys. Recent analysis comparing turkey remains at Mesa Verde, one such village in southern Colorado, to samples from modern turkey populations in the Rio Grande Valley of north-central New Mexico determined that the latter birds descended in part from turkeys cultivated at Mesa Verde, with shared genetic markers appearing only after 1280. Okay, so another very tricky type question. Let's go through these and write it down. Puebloans emerged 1500 BCE. Dispersed suddenly 1200s CE. For farming, let me rewrite that. Crops and turkeys. Recent analysis, turkey remains at Mesa Verde, one such village, to samples from modern turkey, determined that the latter birds, so modern turkeys, descended from Mesa Verde. Oh. With gene after 1280. Okay, very confusing. How is this possible? Do not make any assumptions. We're going to get our answer from looking at the answer choices. So for A, conditions of the terrains in the Rio Grande Valley and Mesa Verde had greater similarities in the past than they do today. B, some ancestral Puebloans migrated to the Rio Grande Valley in the late 1200s and carried farming practices with them. C, indigenous peoples living in the Rio Grande Valley primarily planted crops and did not cultivate turkeys before 1280. And D, the ancestral Puebloans of Mesa Verde likely adopted the farming practices of indigenous peoples living in other regions. Based off what we have here, let's go back. Puebloans emerged 1500 BC, dispersed suddenly, abandoning villages and systems for farming. So where did they go? We can't make any assumptions, but just keep that in mind. Turkey remains at Mesa Verde are related to, compared to, modern turkeys. And then let's write Rio Grande Valley because our answer choices did specify that. Oh, Rio Grande turkey. Rio Grande Valley. And then the latter birds, these guys descended from the turkeys at Mesa Verde. How? Let's get it. So like we talked about for here, greater similarities in the past, we can't know that. Right? This here would not show that they had greater similarities in the past than they do today. We would not be able to determine that. B, some ancestral Puebloans migrated to the Rio Grande Valley and carried farming practices with them. That would make sense, right? That's a very possibility. They dispersed, so maybe after dispersing, they migrated there and they took their turkeys with them. That would show why the Rio Grande Valley turkeys, modern turkeys, could have descended from Mesa Verde turkeys. So, C. Oh yeah, I did not have space to write maybe in the slides, so I will write it here. And C is wrong because did not cultivate turkeys before 1280. We can't know that, right? Living in the Rio Grande Valley, how would we know whether those indigenous people did that or not? And D, living in other regions, are we going to be able to determine that Mesa Verde ancestral Puebloans likely adopted the farming practices of indigenous people living in other regions? Our passage did not suggest that, so we cannot assume that. Our answer is B. Delete our maybe. They took their farming practices with them, their farming practices and their turkeys. And that's why there are genetic similarities between the two. Okay, next one. Number 18. One challenge when researching whether holding elected office changes a person's behavior is the problem of ensuring that the experiment has an appropriate control group. To reveal the effect of holding office, researchers must compare people who hold elected office with people who do not hold office, but who are otherwise similar to the office holders. Since researchers are unable to control which politicians win elections, they therefore blink. Okay, another riddle. So, a problem of researching whether holding, okay, let's write changes a person's behavior. This is what we're trying to determine. And the problem is that the experiment has an appropriate control group, needs to be ensured. Okay, so hard need to ensure that good control group. Like that. We must compare people who hold elected office versus do not hold office, but are otherwise similar, right? Because should be the only difference. Holding elected office should be the only difference between the groups, because everything else needs to be similar or it's going to be an incorrect control. Since researchers are unable to control which politicians win elections, therefore can't know who will win ... Therefore, I'm struggling today. Like that. Okay. A. So, struggle to find valid data about the behavior of politicians who do not currently hold office. B. Can only conduct valid studies with people who have previously held office. C. Who differ from office holders in several significant ways. And D. Find an appropriate control group. Okay. So, this kind of question, it's very important for us to remember one detail. Let me kind of teach you guys something about science experiments. C, should select a control group of people who differ from office holders in several significant ways is definitely not going to be the answer. If you are doing a scientific experiment, the control and the other group that is being tested should only differ in one way. So let's call this independent variable. Right now, it's hold elected office versus do not hold office. The reason why they tell us that it needs to be otherwise similar, it's because we're trying to do a scientific experiment. So if there are other factors that are different, then we would not be able to determine which factor is affecting this change, this difference between the control and independent variable. We need it to be only one different change. So we can delete C. Now remember. Okay, welcome to video number 4 for SAT practice test number 5, module 1. Number 26. In 1986, conceptual artist Sophie asked 23 people, all of whom had been born without sight, to describe their image of beauty in rich detail. Calais paired excerpts of these conversations with photographs, both of interviewees and the items they described, from hair to grass to sculptures, to powerful effect in her exhibition, The Blind. So let's determine from hair to grass to sculptures what that's talking about. Is it the first part, or does it need to be connected to the latter? Both of interviewees and the items they described. So this is talking about those items, from hair to grass to sculptures. So that tells me that we can now delete C and D. First of all, D is going to be just incorrect usage. You would never use a colon like that. And C, we need to make sure that from hair to grass to sculptures is connected to the previous part. Described, comma, from hair to grass to sculptures versus here with a dash. Because we have both of interviewees and the items they describe from hair to grass to sculptures, we need another dash here, because too powerful effect in her exhibition needs to continue right here from before the dash. So this needs to connect with this. So our answer is B. So here it's like a descriptive clause between the dashes, starting from both all the way to sculptures. Okay, number 27. Celebrated Tewa potter Maria Martinez made her signature all-black ceramic vessels using a heating technique called reduction firing. This technique involves smothering the flames surrounding the clay vessel. On the contrary, for example, previously as a result, the vessel takes on a shiny black hue. Previous sentence says technique smothers flames, flame, blank, vessel, shiny. Okay, so the technique smothers the flame, the vessel is shiny. It's a result. On the contrary would not make sense because there's no contrast. It is not an example, and previously is contextually incorrect because we talk about a technique. We want to see what happens when that happens, and it's the vessel shiny. So as a result of the technique, the vessel takes on a shiny black hue. Number 28. Historians agree that the jazz pianist Jelly Roll Morton was exaggerating when he claimed to have invented jazz music. No one can deny blank that Morton's innovative compositions and remarkable improvisational skills helped shape jazz as a genre during its early years. So historians agree and deny. I'm seeing a connection between these words. Historians agree that Jelly exaggerating invented jazz. I'm not going to write that. You guys can get it. No one deny blank dot dot dot. So there's a contrast. No one can deny, though, that Morton's innovative compositions, etc. So therefore, in the second place, that one's definitely incorrect. In other words, this is not stating the same thing, so we can delete C, and it's not a therefore situation. It's not a result. Our answer is D. Historians agree that the jazz pianist Jelly, it was exaggerating when he claimed to have invented jazz, but no one can deny that he was actually a very remarkable artist. Okay, next one. Number 29. According to law, countries with single ballot majoritarian elections from single-member districts tend to polarize into two-party systems, wherein dueling political parties consistently dominate the political system. Blank, countries with proportional representation electoral systems tend to support multi-partyism. So if it's a single ballot polarize. Oh, let me rewrite that. Okay, two parties. And if it's the other one, I'm just going to make it short. It's going to be multi-party. Like that. So, subsequently, conversely, for instance, in other words, it's not following, it's not an example, and it's not stating the same thing in other words. Our answer is conversely. Single ballot system is a two-party system. Proportional representation is going to be multi-party system. We needed a contrast. Okay. Number 30. A turtle shell appears external to the animal, protecting its body like armor. The shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton, a rigid outer casing like that of a crustacean or an insect, when in fact it is an endoskeleton. Okay? So, shell appears external, blank, incorrectly assumed exoskeleton when it is actually endoskeleton. So, that being said, however, for instance, and hence. Our answer is D, hence. The shell appears external. Thus, people believe that it is an exoskeleton, when in reality it is actually an endoskeleton. That being said, however, and for instance, it's not a but situation, a contrast. It's not an example. And that being said just means like, let me say something else after saying something. So that being said, etc. Okay? Actually, why don't we do an example for that being said? So it's raining outside. That being said, I still want to go to the park. Something like that. That would be a very incorrect situation for this passage. 31. Okay, so we talked about how test 5 and test 6, a little bit of a different thing is going to be that we may need to check the notes to kind of choose an answer, but we should still eliminate first. So, the student wants to identify the real author of Adam Bede. Okay. The real author of Adam Bede was Mary Ann Evans. Okay, so that looks good right away. Author, the real author, like that. It has been identified. For B, was widely assumed to be a pseudonym. So George Eliot was widely assumed. It does not mention the real author. C, it says the author's name was George Eliot. That does not identify the real author. And D, a woman, definitely not. Right? So the real author of Adam Bede was Mary Ann Evans. So this question is very similar to the previous tests. We're able to determine the answer by just looking at the requirement. Okay, let's see what we have for the next question. 32, the student wants to specify how the salt enables energy storage. So we need to show how the salt enables energy storage. For A, we're going to determine scientists have developed a freeze-thaw battery that contains molten salt. B, the stored energy in a freeze-thaw battery which contains molten salt can be used by reheating the battery. C, the molten salt in a freeze-thaw battery solidifies at room temperature, energy stops flowing and can be stored. Okay, so this is the first time that we actually see an explanation of how. Let's keep reading. D, molten salt allows a freeze-thaw battery to retain 92%, definitely not. We're going to delete that one. Sure. Looking back at this one, scientists have developed a freeze-thaw battery that contains, so A says that it contains molten salt, we can delete it. B, it can be used by reheating the battery. Okay, welcome to video number 2, module 2, SAT practice test number 6. We're on number 9. Let's read the passage. Scholarly accounts of the Chicano movement, a movement that advocated for the social, political, and cultural empowerment of Mexican Americans and reached its zenith in the 1960s and 1970s, tend to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures in the movement, making it seem uniformly radical. Geographer Juan Herrera has shown, however, that if we shift our focus toward the way the movement manifested in comparatively low-profile neighborhood institutions and projects, we see participants espousing an array of political orientations and approaches to community activism. So this one, because it's an underlined question, we don't have to write too much. Let's say Chicano movement tend to focus most militant, outspoken figures. Let's see what the question says. If we can't answer it, which is unlikely, we can just go back and look at it. So A, it presents a trend in scholarship on the Chicano movement that the text claims has been re-evaluated by researchers in light of Herrera's work on the movement's participants. So does it present a trend? B, it identifies an aspect of the Chicano movement that the text implies was overemphasized by scholars due to their own political orientations. Did they mention own political orientations in that underlined sentence, right? C, it describes a common approach to studying the Chicano movement. Okay, a common approach. Oh, let me underline that as well. And D, it summarizes the conventional method for analyzing the okay, so there's no method. Okay, so Chicano movement tends to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures. So scholarship movement that the re-evaluated by researchers in Herrera's work. Okay, so we need to check if it has been re-evaluated. Let's take a look at the passage. It's shown, however, that if we shift our focus toward the way the movement manifested in comparatively low-profile neighborhoods, we see participants espousing an array of political orientations and approaches to community activism. Okay, so then that tells me that A is incorrect, right? This is not necessarily a trend, first of all. It says they tend to focus on it. It never says that it's going to be reevaluated, and that is not the focus of our underlined sentence. For B, overemphasized by scholars due to their own political orientations, although they mention political orientation somewhere else in the passage, that does not mean that the focus, the function of the underlined sentence is to show this. This is the wrong focus. Again, we need to show that they tended to focus on the most militant, outspoken figures. C, common approach, so that is technically a common approach to studying the Chicano movement that, according to the text, obscures the ideological diversity of the movement's participants. That sounds good, because if they're only focusing on the most militant, outspoken figures, then that means that they're going to be obscuring the diversity of the movement. So that's a maybe. And D summarizes the method. We talked about that already. It's not a method. We can delete D. Okay. The only one that's kind of confusing would have been A. Maybe you guys have chosen this one. So make sure you focus on the wording. It presents a trend here. Let me erase the underlined line. It presents a trend in scholarship on the Chicano movement. The reason that could technically be a little bit confusing because tend to focus could be a trend. But common approach is a much better word to describe this than to say trend. On the Chicano movement that the text claims has been reevaluated by researchers in light of. Has it been reevaluated because of Herrera's work? We can't know that. Answer is C. Okay. Moving forward. Number 10. Elizabeth has identified a negative correlation between the share of developing countries' economies derived from natural resource extraction and those countries' receipts of foreign investment. This may appear counterintuitive. Resource extraction requires initial investments in extractive technology, for instance, at scales best met by multinational corporations. But Sidhu notes that natural resource industry's boom-bust cycle can destabilize local currencies and increase developing countries' vulnerability to external shocks, creating levels of uncertainty to which foreign investors are typically averse. Okay, this one we do need to write notes. Negative. Correlation between developing country economy from natural resource extraction and receipt of foreign investment. Counterintuitive, because resource extraction requires investments. Okay. So first of all, one thing I want to note is that for the SAT, a lot of times you guys are going to come across very difficult passages. Like there's no way, I mean, I'll be very impressed if you guys knew what natural resource extraction is and its relationship to foreign investment. The great thing about the SAT is you do not need to have any prior knowledge. As you solve questions, they're written in a way that you don't actually need to understand everything that's happening, understand every detail about what is kind of mentioned to us. Your job is to be able to focus and understand the kind of relationship and the claims that are being made. So negative correlation between developing country economy from natural resource extraction and receipt. So they have a negative correlation between A and B. That's essentially how I think about it. I'm not thinking that these two things are separate things and understanding how they are related. It's more A and B to me in my head. Something that requires resource extraction, and the other one is like foreign investment, like that. I think of them very broadly as opposed to trying to completely understand what it's saying. Okay, continuing on. Sidhu says that boom-bust cycle, another one that you don't really need to know to answer the question. Otherwise, they would explain it. Boom-bust cycle, natural resource, that word is resource, industry can destabilize. This is the important part that you guys should focus on. Words like destabilize, that tells us things about the passage that cannot be ignored. Local currency and increase developing country vulnerability to external shocks, creating levels of uncertainty to which foreign investors are typically averse. So, and this here would cause uncertainty that foreign investors don't like. Okay, that's good enough. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? So take a second, write this down if you need to, and we'll get started. So, A,